we're going to look at some lessons from the life of Abraham, the man who was called the father of the faithful. And we're going to look at a specific characteristic of his faith, how he chose to live his life. That is one of the reasons why he was called the friend of God. And we start this story in Genesis chapter 13. Abraham went out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. And Abraham was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. So he's just received God's calling, and as he's journeying out, we're told that he is very rich in cattle. He's taking everything he's got with him to go into this new land that he doesn't know. And as he's traveling, Lot is also going with him. So Abraham's going, and Lot, his nephew, is traveling with him. And in the next verse, we see Lot described here. And Lot also, which went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. So Abraham was called to go into this land. He went and he took Lot with him. They both were very wealthy. They had large flocks, herds, lots of cattle. And the land was simply not big enough for the both of them. There wasn't enough resources in that land to sustain both their herds. And this led to a problem. We carry on reading in verse 7. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelt in the land. So the people that were in charge of looking after their flocks started fighting among themselves because there wasn't enough resources in the land. They were fighting over whose flocks got to feed at the well, who got to graze in what areas, because there just wasn't enough to feed them both. And these arguments started to develop. And I wanted to notice it just drops in a little note there that the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelt then in the land. That's an interesting note. As God's people are being called here, they're starting to have infighting among themselves. And it says that there are these other nations that are dwelling in the lands, these nations that they are supposed to be witnessing to. They're supposed to be witnessing to these nations. But instead of witnessing, these nations are beginning to see God's people fighting among each other. They're starting to destroy the witness that they had. And so what is Abraham going to do? And Abraham said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And so here Abraham is giving Lot the choice of land. He's saying the land's not big enough to support us both. And there's starting to be fights between our herdsmen. And he knows if this carries on, it's going to destroy any unity God's people had. He knows that God had called them out into that land to inherit it, to be a witness. As in Genesis 12, when he first gives them the calling, he says that in thee shall all nations be blessed. God was going to bless Abraham so that everyone around him could share in that blessing, that the blessing was supposed to flow to all those around him. But now the Canaanite and the Perizzites are dwelling in the land, are going to see this infighting. God's going to be dishonored. They're going to think, who is the God that would call these people that can't even, live in peace with themselves? And they're supposed to be a witness to the world. So Abraham is saying God is going to be dishonored. Their witness is going to be destroyed. And that there's going to be ununity and division within his people. And because of this, Abraham is telling Lot, look, you look at the land, you choose the best parts that you want, and you go there, and I will take whatever's left. And just to give this a bit more context of what it is that Abraham's doing here, we're just going to jump back to Genesis 12, when the story of Abraham first picks up. Okay, Genesis 12, starting at verse 1. Now the Lord had said unto Abraham, get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, into a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great. and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So we read before how that Abraham went into this promised land, and that Lot came with him. But here, who is the person that God called? God only called Abraham, or Abram as he was then called before his name was changed. Abraham was the one who had the calling. God told Abraham, come into this land and I will give it to you. Lot was a tag along. He journeyed with him, but the calling, the promise, and the land was Abraham's. So if there was a controversy in the land and it couldn't sustain both of them, who was the one that had the right to stay there, and who was the one that should have left? Okay, Abraham could have said, God called me into this land. God has called me to dwell here. This is the land that he has given me. I'm going to stay here. You have to go and find somewhere else to live. Abraham could have done that, and he would have been well within his rights. But Abraham chose that being righteous was more important than being right. He was willing to suffer the loss, to give Lot the good land, and for him to go and dwell in the hilly country of Canaan, so that God would not be dishonored, so that there would still be unity among God's people, to avoid this division. Okay, he was willing to suffer personal loss to himself, to give up what was right, instead stand for what was righteous. And not only did Abram have the right to that land because God had called him, but as we carry on reading, we find the relationship between Lot and Abraham. It says, so Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abraham took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. And so here we're told that Lot was Abraham's brother's son. It was his nephew. Okay, so Abraham was Lot's uncle. So if, again, there had been any disagreement before them, Lot should have submitted to Abraham as his elder, as his uncle. Okay, Abraham not only had the right in having the preeminence in God's calling, giving him the prerogative to decide which land he would dwell in, and Lot having to choose the own, but he was also the elder, he was also the uncle. And these two things, Abraham had the right to the land. But Abraham chose that being righteous was more important than being right. Rather than standing up for his rights, he was going to stand up for God's honor. He was going to stand up for what would cause them to still be able to have a witness among the nations that dwelt in the land. What was best for God's people, for the unity, to preserve that in God's people. These are the things that Abraham considered being more important than being right. And I want to notice Lot's response. Okay, we jump back to Genesis 13. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest to Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plains of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Now, something that makes the next bit we read, when God speaks to Abraham, be a bit more impactful, is understanding the geography of the area where they are. Lot is looking at the plains of Jordan, where the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are. That's in this area where today we have the Dead Sea. It's the lowest place on earth. It's below sea level, okay, in this big, long valley. Now, like, it's the Dead Sea there, it's a desert area there, but back then, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, it was like the Garden of Eden. Okay, it was beautiful, it was lush, and Lot chose to go and dwell there, down in the valley where the Dead Sea is. And Abraham went to Canaan, went up to the hill country. So Lot went down into the valley and he's dwelling in there, and Abraham's going up into the hill country of Canaan. And just keep that in mind as we read how God responded to Abraham and his choice. In Genesis 13, from verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abraham, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward, for all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land, in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. So God comes to Abraham and gives him this promise that he would give him all the land. Abraham was called into that land. There was this division between him and Lot, and Abraham gave up his right to choose which was his land and told Lot, you pick whatever you want and I'll go elsewhere. Because Abraham chose to be righteous. He chose to seek God's glory first. And God comes to Abraham and honors him. As God says, I will honor those who honor me. And he gives Abraham again the promise that all the land will be his. But notice he says, lift up your eyes, look northward, southward, eastward, and westward. And Abraham had journeyed up into the land of Canaan, into the hill country. And in my mind here, I imagine Abraham being on the top of the hill, him looking westward, looking out towards the Mediterranean, him looking northward up into Lebanon, looking southward down towards Egypt, and then looking eastward over to the valley where Lot was dwelling. He can see the whole land as far as the eye can see. God is saying, this is yours. Now, just imagine if Abraham had decided to stay in the plains of Jordan and to send Lot out. And if God had given him the same promise and said, lift up your eyes and look, he would have looked westward and seen the cliffs face when En-gedi and Masada are. He would have looked eastward and seen that the hills leading over to Jordan. He would have looked northward and seen the valley rising up, and southward and seen the valley rising up again. All he could have seen would have been what was inside that valley. And so because Abraham chose that being righteous was more important than being right, then seeking God's glory and his honor was more important than seeking his own, what was his by right in this own world, in this life. God, it had put him in a place so that when God gave him this promise, the blessing was far greater than it could have been if he had stayed in the valley. And so this is the first part we see here in Abraham's life. When he's brought into this test, he chooses that righteousness is more important than being right. And this is an incredibly important lesson for everyone. I remember talking to a friend at church one day, and he was talking about how he hadn't talked to his brother in like 10, 12 years because their family had had a falling out. And some big argument. He didn't go into details of what it was about, but he was saying, how are we supposed to make this right when his brother was wrong? His brother, they'd done something, or they'd said something wrong, and it caused to a family argument. And he's like, we can't resolve this because his brother was the one who was wrong. And it just makes me think of here. Okay, yes, in the situation, Lot was the one who was wrong. Lot was the one who said, no, Abraham, God has called you. This is your land. You choose where you want. I'll go. No, Abraham, you were the one who was right. You're my uncle. You choose the land you want, and I'll go up to the hilly country of Canaan. Okay? But Abraham didn't assert his right. It wasn't important to Abraham who was right. It was important to Abraham about being righteous, of seeking God's glory, of asking, how does this affect our witness to the Canaanites and the Perizzites? How does this affect their view of God? How does this affect the unity within God's people? These were the things that were important to Abraham, not who was right. And so Abraham was willing to give up being right so he could be righteous. And there are so many, family situations, like with my friend I was talking about, where their family has been split because they're concerned over who was right, and they're not willing to look past that. And so many relationships have ended because somebody was right and they were not willing to move from that. But here in Abraham, the father of the faithful, the man who was called the friend of God, we see to him being righteous was more important than being right. And when he chose that, God came down and rewarded him. God gave him the promise that all the land would be his and his descendants. All the land that he could see, including the land that he had just given to Lot. God saying that land will return to you and your descendants. And we see this same character trait of Abraham coming up in the next story with the kings of Sodom. Now, Genesis 14 starts off by talking about these foreign kings that have come into this area and started a war with the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other cities around there, and they brought them into subjection. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. Then the following year, Chedorlaomer brought his armies back, and they started destroying cities, and they fought a war against them. We pick this up in verse 8. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zoar, and they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim, with Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, with Tidal, king of nations, with Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, the king of Elsar, 4 kings with 5. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there. And they that remained fled to the mountains. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So as these kings came through, they defeated Sodom and Gomorrah and all their kings. They raided their cities, they stole all their goods, and they took all their people as slaves. And then, and just carrying on here in verse 13, the message is brought to Abraham. And we read, and there came one that escaped and told Abraham the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshkelon, and brother of Aner. And these were confederate with Abraham. And when Abram heard his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them, and he and his servants by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the woman also, and the people. And returning from this battle, okay, Abraham has gone there. He set an ambush. He defeated these foreign invaders, okay, and he had taken all the people that they had taken captive and all their riches, and he's brought it back. And as he's coming back, the king of Sodom comes out to meet him. And he says this to Abraham. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. Now, we're going to see what Abraham's responses are next. But first, I just want to look at the setting here. Okay, Abraham had gone and defeated these invaders. He had taken that all the goods there is his by the rights of the spoil of war. He had gone and gotten it and taken all the captives back. Okay, so that all belongs to him. And now the king of Sodom is even coming out to him and saying, keep all the goods to yourself. All the riches and all the plunder that was stolen, keep that to yourself. The king of Sodom is just incredibly grateful that Abraham has defeated them from their tyrant overlords, that it was putting them into subjection for 12 years. And now that Abraham's brought back, he's saying, just keep it. Keep all the wealth. So Abraham could have done that. He had that wealth was his by rights of conquest, and his by right again, because the king of Sodom is just telling him to keep it. He's saying, just give me back, let the people return home, and you can keep all the goods to yourself. But notice Abraham's response in verse 22. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread, even a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. Save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshkelon, and Mamre. Let them take their portion. So Abraham is standing there with all the wealth that was stolen, the wealth of 5 cities that were stolen by these invaders, and he's brought it back, and it's in his possession, and the king of Sodom is saying, keep it. But Abraham's response is, no. I have lifted up my hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. Everything is the Lord's, and he has promised to bless me and make me rich. Okay, he has promised to lead me into this land, to protect me, to bless me, and to make me rich. And so I'm not going to take any of your wealth. Otherwise, when the king of Sodom, one of the people that God had sent them in to be a witness to, looks at Abraham prospering, he won't say, surely God has blessed Abraham. He will say, surely I have blessed Abraham and I have made Abraham rich. Abraham knows that if he takes this wealth that is his by right, it's going to destroy the witness that he has there among the people. So he says to them, no, I have lifted up my hands to God. I'm depending on God. God is the one who has promised to bless me. I don't need any of this. So he takes no part in the wealth of 5 cities. He gives it back so that he can maintain that witness before the people, so that they will have no reason to think that Abraham has been blessed apart from that it is the God that he serves. To Abraham here, having God glorified before the people, having the people see that he is who he is, he's become who he is only because of the blessing of God, is more important than taking part of the wealth of 5 cities. Abraham chooses to give up what is his by rights and chooses rather what is righteous. He seeks first the glory of God and his kingdom, and has no part in anything that could lessen God's glory and his witness before the nations. And again, as soon as he does this, God comes to Abraham and speaks to him. And I want to notice that the promise that God gives Abraham after he has given up all this wealth in this fight. In Genesis 15, verse 1, we read, after these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And he carries on in chapter 15 to talk about the blessing that he will give. His descendants will be great, will inherit all this. And this is the part where we have that promise that Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. But I just wanted to focus on the first verse, how this promise starts off. Abraham had given up all this wealth, okay, that he had got in this battle. And God says, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. I'm the one who protected you through this, and I'm the one who will be your reward. Abraham gave up earthly riches, and God comes to him with the promise that I am your eternal reward. I am the one who will be your reward. Abraham chose to seek first God's glory, to give up his right and instead choose to be righteous. And God responded by telling Abraham that I am your shield and your exceeding great reward, and carries on to give him the promise that his seed will be as the stars of heaven, and then confirm that promise by a covenant. In these 2 stories, we see this point of Abraham's faith, that to him being righteous was more important than being right. These 2 times, Abraham suffered loss. He gave up the best part of the land. He gave up the riches of these 5 cities to seek God's glory, to choose to be righteous, so that he could have a witness among the people, so that they could look to him and know that his God is the true God, who honors those who honor him. And he will fulfill his promise in blessing Abraham to be a blessing to the nation. And the same character trait, the same aspect of Abraham's faith, we're going to now follow this through, and we're going to jump into the New Testament and see how this is played out in the life of Jesus. We turn to John chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Now a certain man was sick named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sister sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. So here Jesus hears news that Lazarus is sick, but he doesn't immediately go to heal him. He waits there. And here Lazarus is sick, and we pick the story up in verse 11. These things said he, and after that he saith unto them, our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. Howbeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking rest in sleep. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent that ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. So Jesus first receives the news that Lazarus is sick, but he tarries there, and he doesn't immediately go down. And now he is speaking to his disciples, and he tells them, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes, to the intent that you might believe. And now that he's dead, he's going to go down to see him. And we pick the story up again. We're going to jump down to verse 17. Then, when Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs off. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. So, because of the proximity of where they were to Jerusalem, many Jews came from Jerusalem to be with them, to comfort them. And we're going to pick up on this point later on as we develop. We're going to see that some of these Jews that came had a certain reason to be there, a certain agenda. Okay, but we pick this up in verse 20, carrying on. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary sat in the house. Then Martha said unto Jesus, Lord, if thou had been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou would ask of God, God will give it thee. Now, I just want to pause here. I just want to notice Martha's faith here. Okay, she's coming to Jesus. The first thing she said is, Lord, if thou had been here, my brother had not died. Okay, she is grieving. She is sad that you could have been here. You could have stopped this. Okay, that's the first thing she expresses. But then she carries on. Okay, and says, but I know that even now, whatsoever thou would ask of God, God will give it thee. Okay, she's grieving that Jesus didn't come before to stop her brother from dying, that Jesus allowed this to happen. But she's also still has the faith that Jesus can still do something. Okay, Jesus can still bring him back. And we carry on reading. Jesus saith unto her, thy brother shall rise again. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus saith unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? She saith unto him, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. Now, the important point I want us to pick up here, because we're going to compare Martha's faith here with the faith that Mary has in a little bit. Okay, here Martha is grieving that Jesus didn't come before, that his brother has died, but she still has the faith in believing that Christ can still do something, that Christ can still fix this, that he is the Christ, the Son of God. She's still willing to express that faith. She's not completely lost in her grief. She's willing to, her faith is sustaining her through this grief, through this disappointment. So just keep this in mind. We're going to carry on in verse 28. And when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary, her sister, secretly, saying, the Master is come and calleth for thee. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came unto him. Now Jesus was not yet come into the town, but was in that place where Martha met him. Now this is another interesting point. Jesus was coming to them, but he didn't enter into the town. He was waiting outside. He was not going to go in to where they were all gathered and grieving and mourning. He waited outside and he called Mary to come out to him. Okay, now when I read this is the first point that I sort of think, okay, that's interesting. Why is Jesus refusing to go into where they're grieving, but instead calls Mary to come out to him? Okay, that's an interesting point, and we're going to develop a little bit of why this is. But we carry on reading in verse 31. The Jews then, which were with her in the house, and comforted her, when they saw Mary, that she arose up hastily and went out, followed her, saying, She goeth to the grave to weep there. Then when Mary was come where Jesus was, she saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou had been here, my brother had not died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in his spirit and was troubled. Now notice the difference between what Mary says here and what Martha said when she met Jesus. Mary just simply expresses that, Lord, if thou had been here, my brother had not died. She starts off saying the same thing that Martha said. Okay, she is grieving that Christ had not come to stop her brother from dying. But when Martha had the faith to look past this and to say, I believe you were the Son of God, I believe you can still do something. Whatever you ask of God, he will give you. Mary is just completely lost in her grief here. Okay, she's come to Christ, she's fallen down at his feet, but she's just saying, Lord, you could have saved him. And in her grief, she cannot look past that. And notice that the last verse there, it says, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with it, he groaned in his spirit and was troubled. Okay, something about what Jesus is seeing here is troubling him. Okay, it's more than just that Mary is stuck in her grief and doesn't have the faith to see past that. Her grief is too great. But I'm going to say something here, and we're going to look how this develops later on. Many of these Jews that had come there and were weeping with Mary, for them, this was only a pretense. They were just pretending to be grieved here. They had just come to show their faces, to be seen to be doing something good, to be seen to be caring. They didn't actually care in this. And we're going to see this as we come on. And this is what's troubling Jesus. And I believe it is their false sympathies that are starting to rub off on Mary, that are focusing her on her mourning and on her despair, that has prevented her from looking past this in faith. And as we carry on reading, we're going to see this. In verse 34, and he said, Where have ye laid him? And they said unto him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, Behold how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? Jesus therefore again groaned him in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone laid upon it. Now, I just want to break this down a bit. When Jesus here is weeping, okay, the people see him weeping, and we've got two groups. We're told that the Jews said, Behold how he loved him. Okay, they're seeing him weeping. They're thinking he's weeping for Jesus. So they're thinking Jesus is weeping for Lazarus. Okay, and you can see that their heart's going out to him. They're seeing him weeping, and they're going, Behold how he loved him. They're seeing him weep, and they're wanting to comfort him. But notice it says, and some of them. Okay, there's another group. And some of them said, Could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died? They're seeing Jesus here at the tomb, and their response is not to try to comfort someone who's weeping. Their response is as finding a fault, and is, couldn't this man, if he had done all these miracles, had saved this man from dying? Their response is not to comfort someone who is weeping. Their response is to find an accusation against Jesus. These were the people that had come from Jerusalem. While some of them had come and were mourning and wanting to comfort Mary and Martha, others were coming as a pretense And they were using this as an example to sow seeds of doubt against Jesus, saying, surely if he was a great miracle worker, he could have saved him. And I think this is the reason why Jesus didn't go in to where they were mourning. He called Mary out. He wanted to call Mary away from these people. Okay? He wanted to speak to her away from them. But they followed, and they keep speaking these words of doubt that had damaged Mary's faith, so she couldn't look past her sorrow. Okay? And when Jesus is weeping here, I don't believe he's weeping being sorry for Lazarus. Because we just saw in the previous verse here at the end that when Jesus saw the Jews there weeping with their pretense, he groaned in spirits and he was troubled. He was troubled because of their hypocrisy and the effect that was having on Mary. And here, when he weeps, we say there are some that hearts are drawn out to him generally, but there are some there that are just using this to sow seeds of doubt. And again, when we pick up in that last verse, it says, Jesus therefore again groaned in himself. You see the word with therefore, the reason Jesus is groaning in himself is because of what these people are saying. Because they're not there because they care about the ones who are suffering and mourning. They're there as a pretense to simply show their face, to be seen to be doing something good, while at the same time sowing seeds of doubt against Jesus. But Jesus doesn't openly rebuke them here. Okay, he carries on. He calls them to show him where the stone is laid. Jesus said, "Take ye away the stone." Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. Jesus saith unto her, said I not unto thee, if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? And they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. I knew that thou hearest me always. But because of the people which stood by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth bound hand and foot with grave cloths, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Listen, and let him go. And upon seeing Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead, we have the response of those that were watching. Then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him. But notice there's a second group, but some of them went their way to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus did. So before, when they saw Jesus weeping, not understanding why he was weeping, there was many of the Jews, their hearts went out to him. They said, Behold how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not this man who had healed the side of the vine and also caused that this man should not have died? And here again, some of them, the Jews believe, but there's another group that as soon as they see Lazarus being raised from the dead, they immediately run away to tell the Pharisees what had happened. And as soon as the Pharisees hear what happened, they start plotting the death of Jesus. We hear this here in verse 47. Then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, What do we? For this man doeth many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him. And the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. And one of them, named Caiaphas, being the high priest that same year, said unto them, Know ye nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not? So there is some of these Jews there that went there weeping with Mary and Martha for Lazarus. But as soon as Lazarus was brought back to life, they didn't rejoice, they weren't happy. They immediately ran away to the Pharisees, who started plotting to kill Jesus. And not only that, if we jump to John 12, the next chapter, we read this in verse 9. Much people of the Jews, therefore, that knew that he was there, and they came not only for Jesus' sake, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus to death, because that by reason of him, many of the Jews went their way and believed on Jesus. So here, we can see here that these Jews, that were there. Not all of them, but there was a group of Jews that had come from Jerusalem to weep with Mary and Martha over the death of Lazarus. But as soon as Lazarus was brought back to life, these Jews ran and told the Pharisees. They started plotting to kill Jesus and to kill Lazarus. Okay? And this is why when Jesus saw them there weeping, following Mary, it says he was grieved in his spirit and was troubled. Jesus could see. He could read their hearts. He could see what was going on. He knew it was just a pretense. And this is what grieved him. This is what troubled him. And he could have laid out the hypocrisy like he did in many other places in the gospel and rebuked them for it, but he didn't. Okay? You can see how troubled he was. There's 3 times we're told that he was grieved in spirit and was troubled when he saw what was happening there. He wept. And then again, when they carried on speaking their seeds of deceit and their doubt of him, it says he again groaned more. So 3 times you see Jesus is really troubled. It's bringing him to tears. He's grieving. His spirit is grieved because of what's going on here, but yet he doesn't utter a word of rebuke. And I find that very interesting. He's not okay with what's happening, but he doesn't speak a word of rebuke. And you've got to ask the question, why? Why, when Jesus can read their hearts, he knows their hypocrisy, he many other times has blatantly called out hypocrisy like this and rebuked people before all. Why doesn't he do it here? And I believe the reason he didn't do it there was because when Mary had come to him, she had fallen down on at his feet in tears, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother had not died. In her grief, okay, she was stuck in that moment of grief, okay. If Jesus had gone on and openly blasted hypocrisy, she would not have understood what had happened. It would have further hurt her. Okay, her faith was damaged and she couldn't get past this moment of grief she was in. And because of that, while Jesus could have rebuked them, and it would have been right for him to do so, okay, he could have rebuked the hypocrisy, and it would have been truth, every word that he spoke, and he would have been right in doing so. He didn't, because to him, the state of the one kneeling at his feet, the effect it would have had on her is more important than speaking the truth all rightly to those who were there in hypocrisy. He cared about how it would affect her and how it would have damaged her more than about how it would have set the record straight for all those hypocrites. To Jesus here, being righteous and comforting Mary was more important than being right and rebuking all those hypocrites. And I want to read one more passage here. Notice the words that we read here. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He read the hearts of all assembled. He saw that with many, what passed as a demonstration of grief was only pretense. He knew that some in the company, now manifesting hypocritical sorrow, would ere long be planning the death, not only of the mighty miracle worker, but of the one to be raised from the dead. Christ could have stripped from them their robe of pretended sorrow, but he restrained his righteous indignation. The words he could in all truth have spoken, he did not speak, because of the loved one kneeling at his feet in sorrow, who truly believed in him. That's from Desire of Ages, page 533. I want us to notice how she pulls together everything that we saw here from the Gospel of John. Okay? Christ read their hearts. He saw their hypocrisy. It grieved him and it troubled him. And he could have, with all truth, have spoken against them. But he didn't. Because of the one who was kneeling at his feet in sorrow, who truly believed in him. Because it would have damaged her faith even more. He did not speak what he could have spoken in all truth and what would have been right to do. Because being righteous was more important than being right. And that is the message I want us to leave us with. We saw this in the life of Abraham, with the controversy that broke up between him and Lot, and with the wealth that he got from the battle of the kings and the king of Sodom. And here again with Jesus and Mary. In these three examples, we have the case where being righteous is more important than being right. And so often, we don't make that distinction. So often in our lives, we look at a situation and we see, well, who is right? What is right? What are my rights? Where can I draw the line and stand here and be right? Okay, but we don't ask the question, what is righteous? Okay, I might be able to stand here and claim that something is mine. I might be able to claim it and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to say this because what I'm saying is right. What I'm saying is true. But you've got to ask the question, is what you're saying righteous? What is the impact this is going to have? Not on in this case, the hypocrites there, but what is the impact it's going to have on the one who is grieving and weeping at the feet of Jesus? What is you demanding that this is yours by right? What is the impact they're going to have on the other nations that are dwelling around watching God's people? What impact is that going to have on the witness that you have with others? And this is the thing that is so easy to fall into us, this trap of trying to know what is right and then sticking to that. But God calls us to be righteous. That's the lesson that Abraham learned. Okay, that's what he demonstrated. And he was called the friend of God. And that is what Jesus manifests here as well. And that is what God asks of us. Repeatedly throughout Scripture, God calls us to be righteous. And that's the message I want to leave us with here today.